Thank you so much, Ray. Okay, so I wanted to spend some time today talking about storytelling and visualization in some detail that I think will tie up what we've already heard from the presentations before. But I think the key piece we're going to kind of zoom in on first is the storytelling component and how and why that's so important. And when you start talking about storytelling, I think the very best way to talk about storytelling is to tell a story. And like any good story, it's going to start with once upon a time. So once upon a time in a boardroom far, far away, a whole bunch of people had gathered together. You see, the company was having challenges. They were having some difficulties. Sales in China were down and nobody quite knew why. So they had contracted out with a market research firm. We'll call that fairy tale market research. And fairy tale market research did their magic and they found all the insights and they knew exactly what the problem was. And Bob, who was a brilliant market researcher, came in to present the findings. Unfortunately, everybody sitting at the boardroom table was bored. Nobody was paying any attention, and Bob really didn't understand why. Well, ultimately, during his presentation, Bob was using all sorts of fancy terms, and obviously everything he was saying was technically accurate. Everything was correct. But the words he was using, the way he was explaining the story, the way he was trying to explain and teach the insights that he had discovered just was way over everybody's head, and he was losing his audience. And unfortunately, nobody lived happily ever after. The business was frustrated. They didn't get what they needed. They didn't understand what to do with the information that Bob had presented, and they never hired him again. The problem is that ultimately, storytelling serves a specific purpose. When you go in to teach somebody something, when you're trying to teach them new information or show them how to use the information that you've discovered, the insights that you've uncovered, you need to do it in such a way as to make it understandable to the audience. And in many cases, that means you're going to follow a very similar pattern to every story you've ever read, every movie you've ever watched. It's going to be logically organized. You're going to provide context around it. It's going to be easy to understand without fancy big buzzwords. It's going to teach them a lesson, and it's going to leverage empathy. Now, those two last pieces really connect tightly together because leveraging empathy, I mean, we're talking about market research. Where's the empathy here? Well, this is a really key piece because when we're talking about empathy in this context where we're presenting to a business, you wouldn't assume there would be much empathy involved. But the empathy here is actually pulling on the heartstrings of the person who's hearing the story. And in most cases, as we heard in the first presentation, that's going to be making it something that's really meaningful to the person who's hearing the story, which in some cases can seem a little challenging when you're presenting to a boardroom full of people who are, they're all going to have different angles and different areas of interest, but it is totally possible. Now, first, let's just dive into what a story is. A story is going to have certain key components: setting, conflict, characters, plot, and theme. And your story will have the same thing. So if we think about that, what does all this mean? The setting is where, when is the problem? Conflict, what's the business situation? Characters, who are we talking to? Who's involved? Now, it's not just the audience. It's not just, as we had said in our original story, it's not just China. It's also the people sitting in the room. How are they involved? What part do they play in the story? The plot, that's going to be your insight. That's what you're trying to reveal. And the theme is what opportunity is going to be presented because of that. So if we go back and we look at the story that we had before, and I keep clicking one too far, if we go back and look at the story that we had before, we know our setting is China. It was 2016. We know the problem is they weren't hitting their sales targets. We know the characters are the target audience, the sales leaders, the other people sitting in the room. The plot, well, we're going to make one up because we didn't actually expose that in the original story, but we're going to say that the insight is that the target audience didn't see the value. And then the theme, what opportunity? Well, do we want a new target audience? Do we want to try and reposition our product? All very straightforward information that leads us to a story that people are going to understand, especially if we're leveraging that empathy by speaking to the characters. But we can actually take it one step further because this is kind of a bland story. If we think about other stories that you may have read, any kind of fictional story you've poked in before, usually there's a lot more information. There's subplots and additional information that really provides context and excitement in the story. And we can do that too. By pulling together better information, we can start to tell the big picture story around this and make this a really powerful story. So not only are we talking about missing sales targets in China and potentially repositioning the product or finding a new target audience, let's add in additional information like what does the market look like? Who are the competitors? What's their penetration? What is their position? How long is our sales cycle? And if we make these changes, how long until we're actually going to get a return on our investment in time? We can look at what are consumer behaviors? If we're talking about repositioning the product or potentially seeking additional or a different target audience, what are we looking for? What are they doing in the marketplace that we need to address? How do people use the product? What can we use that information for marketing? And what's at risk if we don't? If we don't do any of this or if we skip any individual components. This is a much more powerful story that, like any book we've ever read, helps to build up and strengthen the core components that we're trying to tell in this story. Now, obviously, this requires a lot of data. And sometimes people start rolling their eyes at this point thinking, well, gee, I can't, make a survey that's this big. We're going to have people taking 3, 4, 5-hour surveys, but it doesn't have to be that. Remember, there's data coming from a wide variety of areas throughout a business. And if you can integrate that in, pull that data in from, your research findings alongside of product information like Internet of Things, sensors and GPS, transactional data they may have in their platform, financial data, you can start to tell a much bigger, a much more powerful story. Now, in pulling this information together may seem like a pretty daunting task, and it can be. There are platforms that can do this, and that's the wonder of technology today, because you're able to pull all that information together, sort it so that it does something really fancy, and then spit it out in a way that's meaningful and useful to the people that need the information. Now, when we spit this out, we're obviously going to want to make sure that we're constructing this story in a logical and rational order. So it's not just about having the components. It's not just about having the data. It's about putting it in the right order. If you think about a book that you may have read in the past, you're going to start by exposing your characters, your setting, your introduction, building up the story. Then you're going to start to build up into the events that led to the problem and talk about that problem and what we're going to do and what that insight is. And then ultimately ending the story with, and here's what we're going to do about it. Because that's the reason why books are written in this order is because this is the order people expect to see information in. This is the order that sort of builds up to that climax of that critical problem / insight where we're revealing to people, okay, here's what we need. And here's what it's going to do for us when we execute on it. This is an excellent organization for any kind of story you're pulling together. But it doesn't stop with constructing the story either. Because once we go and we want to tell that story, we've got to do something that's going to help people to actually understand it. Bob's problem in our original story was that he was just spewing facts and figures and numbers and people's heads were spinning. But there's the beauty of visualization, which was just spoken about in the last, where we can put together a presentation or show people in a very visualized way what makes the most sense to them. Give you an example of a visualization that I think is absolutely fabulous. And this is not the end all. It doesn't have to be a picture, but you can get an idea here from this very simple visualization of how much visualization can do. We've got the basis for an entire story in a single picture. Right out of the gate, you know that we're looking at a comparison of the entire world. Everybody recognizes this right without thinking, just a quick glance. But we also can see something else without knowing anything about what this visualization is or why we're looking at information. We can see a difference in the data. I can see without thinking too hard that there's something different in the US than there is from Eastern Europe and Asia. So right out of the gate, we've started the story. And that's the beauty of visualizations, is that without thinking too hard, at a glance, you can provide the information people need. But the thing with visualizations is they don't have to be pictures. As a matter of fact, pictures can sometimes be distracting. Pictures can take away from what you're doing. So you need to use your pictures in a way that is judicious. You need to think through what's going to actually contribute to the story rather than taking it away. One great way to do it, and where I think the future of storytelling is going, is dashboards. dashboards. So we spent a little time talking already about PowerPoints, but the beauty of a dashboard is that this is live information, real time delivering as they need it. And you can use your words, and as we'd heard in the last presentation, different size fonts, different color fonts to help to guide somebody through that story. And the beauty of the dashboards is that they can actually be tailored to the individual. So we're not trying to tell a story that's going to speak to 900 people in a room. We're telling a story that's going to speak to one person, all with the same data. So it's 900 individual stories with a single data set, and it's a beautiful thing. This will walk people through the entire story. What's happening? In this case, this is an account manager's dashboard that I pulled a screenshot for. What's happening in my accounts? What's at risk? What am I hearing? What do I need to do? It takes you through that story in a very logical order, with headlines that dive right into my personal area of interest, so that I don't have to sit and think, oh, gee, okay, this is great. I see the insight, but what do I do with it? How do I act on it? And of course, this can also be tailored to anyone else. So that was an account manager, but we can also have a different type, a more visual, a more graphic dashboard that leads through a broader picture. In this case, this higher level picture is something more tailored to, say, an executive who wants the holistic picture, wants to know everything in the organization, guiding them through exactly what they need when they need it in a graphical way. Now you'll notice with the graphics, there's no crazy things here. It's all pretty simple. Bar charts, line charts, some stars, colors that tell you red for bad, green for good. These things are really simplistic, and simplicity is absolutely the key. We don't need to try and impress people with fancy stuff that just loses our audience's attention and understanding.
Thank you, Holly. And
Thank you.
Well done. Brilliant. Thank you very much. A couple of questions. So you showed a great example of dealing with a complex situation and mapped out the discussion plan. But what if it's just a simple, I've been asked to test 3 concepts, there's a 1, a 2, and a 3, and here are the data. How do we turn that into a story? Is it harder with something simple?
No, anything can tell a story. And again, I mean, why are you testing the concepts? Who cares about the concepts? Why does it matter? Those are the types of questions you're answering, because we want to be sure that we're telling a complete story. So again, we're starting with the setting, we're starting with the introduction to the story. Why are we here? We're testing 3 concepts, and I mean, it is a pretty simple story. We're testing 3 concepts because we aren't sure which one is going to resonate best with our target audience. And this information that we discovered shows this. And again, in telling that piece around that, what the concept testing is actually, the insights that we've discovered in the concept testing, we're going to want to be sure to tailor that to the appropriate audience based on their area of interest. So it is the same format, it's the same story. It's a little simpler than some of your larger research projects, perhaps, but it doesn't take away the importance of telling a story, because when you boil it down, we're all human and people get bored and confused very easily.
Super. There's a quick question here which I can answer, which is, will the slide decks for each presenter's deck be sent to the participants? They will be available for you to access. They're stored in LinkedIn. They're stored in SlideShare, which is owned by LinkedIn. So you'll be able to see them, and if you sign up to SlideShare, you'll be able to download what are effectively the PDF copies of those. So yes, you will be able to access them. No, we don't send you them individually. It's a little bit kinder on the planet, I think. So, question here very specifically for you, Holly. When using a dashboard that's customizable, is it feasible to serve everyone in a very large organization? Who determines the views, the user or the dashboard engineer?
Well, ultimately, somebody would have so you'd have a dashboard engineer or somebody in your insights or research department actually defining who gets what, and that can be done in a variety of ways. It can be role-based, for example, so everybody in a particular department's getting a similar view that's tailored, again, to their particular portfolio or their specific area of interest. It can be individualized depending on what you need. Obviously, there's time required to set up a dashboard. Once it's actually created, then it's just the data is just feeding in and keeping it real time. So I think a lot has to do with the organization itself and how they're going to structure that. But ultimately, it can be delivered either way based on what's most necessary to the organization's need.
And the final question is, what about if you've got a client who says, I want to start with the management summary, tell me the conclusions and what I'm supposed to do? How do we then go around crafting the story flow from there?
Sure. I think it would be very similar to what we'd seen before, where you still want to be sure to follow a flow where you're setting up the story. And again, if you imagine, flashback to the dashboards that I had shown before, where you had those little sort of box widgets, that's going to be put in a flow or an organization that makes sense to the story. So starting out with some background information, what the insights are for the particular area that we're zooming in on, and then the what's next. The specific level of detail that's contained, whether it's the executive management or the middle management or then the individual contributors, is going to be the actual piece of information that's within those boxes. But as far as the headlines go, it's still going to follow the same kind of story flow, or still should follow the same kind of story flow.
And we've got time for one more question, which has just come in. So are there any companies that you've found who do a very good job in designing these storytelling dashboards? And you can mention your own in answering this.
Of course, we do a fabulous job of it for our own. We do have a voice of the customer program here at Confirmit that does a fabulous job of it, and it is structured in a very story-like way, and again tailored to the individual. So it's actually, we have several levels of dashboards where our execs see that exec high-level overview that, again, is very holistic, very overview of the organization. Everybody below that, the account managers or the say VPs, for example, are going to see everybody, all of the aggregated rolled up information for the staff that's beneath them. The people at the lower levels, the account managers and the rest of us, have a view that we can go in that tells about our individual and also a company-wide. We also have one single dashboard that everybody can go in and look at how the company is performing as a whole. So it's in my opinion quite well done. We do have a few customers who are doing it particularly well as well. Mentioning them by name gets into a slippery slope because I don't know offhand whose names I'm allowed to throw out and not. Some are very, very good at it, and I've found in many cases if they have a dedicated research department and or a dedicated design team that can kind of guide them through it. So oftentimes the larger organizations, they do a really, 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 really good job of doing it.
And are they, the ones that are not using your own tools, are they linking with the Tableaus, with the info tools? What sort of things might they be using?
Well, of course, self-serving, I'm going to want to recommend that they should be linking with us.
Absolutely.
But yes,
absolutely.
there are also other fabulous business tools. Tableau, I used it at a former organization that I worked for, and it was just amazing. I liked it a lot. There are a few others that are just fabulous ways of pulling that information together and ultimately creating beautiful visualizations. So yeah, there's a good variety, and then it's possible to link up multiple. A lot of organizations are using them in different areas of the business where they want to share information between a Confirmit and a Tableau, and that's doable as well. There's another visualization tool that, of course, the name of it is escaping me now, that we have several integrations with at our client's request. And of course, it's gone right out of my head, which is terrible because they do beautiful visualizations. So yes, there's a broad variety of ways to do it. Tableau is a great tool. Confirmit is the best tool in the entire universe, in my opinion. But whatever works best, again, for your organization, as long as you're getting the right information to the right people at the right time, and that being real time, I think that there's a tremendous benefit to that. And of course, telling the story in a way that is going to engage people and really display the insight in the appropriate context.
Thank you so much, Holly. That was fantastic.
Thank you.